digitaljamsessions.com.
Hello and welcome to this Digital Jam session. Today we're joined once again by Imre from Bossa Studios, and we have with us Oscar back from, I'm going to say Rocket Lolly as well as Unity, but we also have with us Nizar, who is new to this mix, and he is from Virtual Arts. So welcome, gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to ask if you could very briefly explain for our listeners who you are and what you do. I'm going to start with Nizar because he's new to the mix and our audience may not have heard of him before.
Yeah, hello. So Nizar Romdan, based in Cambridge in the UK, basically a virtual reality content developer.
Wonderful, thank you. And Imre, why don't you tell us all about what you do at Bossa and what exactly you do with bread?
Hi, I'm Imre. I make games at Bossa and usually eat bread, and sometimes we use it to make games about, which is hilariously good fun.
Okay, and Oscar, why don't you tell us more about your dual roles at Rocket Lolly and Unity?
I do loads of things, probably best known for being a hat wearer every games conference, talking about game development, discovery, monetization, production, you name it, almost anything other than technical stuff under my Unity label. I'm an evangelist for their social tool EveryPlay. In addition, I do things like write books on games as a service, consult with various studios about how to do all the stuff I talk about, and probably most interestingly is I'm making a game based on the Rocky Horror Show.
Wonderful, thank you. And Imre, I suppose it's worth mentioning that you are also on the BAFTA Games Committee, if I recall rightly.
Indeed, and it is a very exciting period because the nominations are in. So now the BAFTA membership will start voting and go through the grueling process of choosing the nominees and then the winner.
Okay.
For the BAFTA awards for next year.
Wonderful.
I have so many games to judge, it's ridiculous. I've got the BAFTA one to do, and I've got the Indie Prize to do. There's about 800 games to play. It's crazy.
Well, you have something to do over Christmas and New Year. There you go. But gentlemen,
and frankly, all that matters is BAFTA Games Awards, because that's the best awards around, and I'm completely biased.
You are completely biased, and we'll not talk about any other game awards since you're on the show right now. So what I wanted to do, though, is I wanted to talk about that old nut virtual reality, which we don't seem to have managed to escape from in this year, in 2016. However, I am aware that, Imre, you have some thoughts around artificial intelligence and the application and use of artificial intelligence in VR. And I know that this is one that we've spoken about a few times now and had various people speak about this. But I am curious to hear from your perspective, your standpoint in terms of what you think the impact of artificial intelligence will be in the context of virtual reality.
Well, I mean, AI will affect everything. Anyone who says otherwise are going to be bitterly disappointed. And so within VR, and I'm not trying to ruin the magic of VR, but VR is big screen, right? And because of the immersion of the device, the amount of content you have to produce on screen is significantly higher and has to be of a higher fidelity. And with that comes that every single inch of that space has to be more detailed and, more importantly, more reactive. And all of those matters can be done with brute force. Basically, let's throw human suffering at it, game designers and artists, until you create all the content. Or we can start looking at ways of how we use AI to produce that content and how to make the game more responsive to player inputs. And again, in VR, the input methods are much more tactile, and you expect the game to react with the same amount of depth and fidelity. So to me, AI will be necessary not as an in-game character running around, but more that intelligent machines basically producing the content real time for you as you interact with it.
So essentially you're talking about environmental design and the creation of environment. And when you say that, there are some people who will immediately start thinking about things like No Man's Sky. And I'm curious from your perspective, Oscar, therefore, what your take is on the other possible perception in terms of AI can create procedurally generated content and those environments as you kind of explore. But there is that danger that without I'm going to say there's the human interaction, it ends up being a rather vast sandbox that isn't necessarily much fun to play. So I'm curious from your perspective, Oscar, what your thoughts are in terms of the use of AI as an environment creation tool.
So you're talking to somebody who absolutely loves No Man's Sky and thinks it's incredibly engaging and enjoyable. And I've just started again with the new release, the new update, and I'm enjoying it. It's very, very rare that I can go back to a game and enjoy it again. I'm one of those people that will burn through things. The fact that I can go back to that and see new things that I haven't seen before and be happy about it and excited about it is interesting. But I want to challenge something about this question, which is actually we don't have to fill every second with visual elements. We can fill every second with gameplay elements. And so, yes, I agree that visual fidelity is fine. But I think this is one of the things that particularly VR, but to a certain extent other mediums as well, can do is give us a sense of immersion that we feel that we are currently present. And if we are present, then decisions that we make become more meaningful, and you can fill people's questioning with meaning rather than necessarily having to resort to AI to do that. So something like I always got to go on about Keep Talking and No One Explodes, because I love the fact that it brings back that board game like moment where it's about us as the two people in the room, not just about the game and the visuals. But Imre is absolutely right. There's a huge opportunity, and particularly around the machine learning side, where we can see some incredible innovations to the way that we deliver experiences. But like I say, not just visual. Like I say, it can be the characters that you meet. But I think it's a beautiful coincidence that the technology underneath the bonnet is at the quality now that we can even come into that idea that we can start considering, particularly if you think about like mobile VR, the fact that we now have ironically ARM processors doing all these kind of crazy things is now feasible, and tap that into the background data, and particularly when we start talking about real world data impacting on gameplay decisions. Now we're in really interesting territory.
Okay, so in that perspective, so Oscar, you've mentioned that there's a lot of people that are using ARM. I'm curious, therefore, Nizar, to hear from you and your perspective on the application of artificial intelligence, or whether it's in terms of ARM tools being used, where you see the opportunity in terms of virtual reality, where it hasn't necessarily already been applied, or you haven't seen any decent use case scenarios of this just yet.
I agree with what Oscar said. I think the opportunity is here today because we have hardware that is really capable to deliver. If you go back, especially we're talking about virtual reality did have, we can say, an attempt a few years ago, maybe more than that, a decade or so. And it didn't take off because the hardware wasn't already at all. Now it is here, it's available, particularly for artificial intelligence. The compute power that for example, the ARM processors provide in mobile devices is so massive. Like you can start running all these heavy algorithms. My previous role was with ARM running developer relations, so we were working quite a lot on experimenting what is possible on these mobile devices, and we did implement a lot of examples how machine learning could be used, whether it's in processing heavy images or generating lots of content procedurally. So the opportunity is actually today all this can be applied, and we can run that on mobile devices, where in the past it was quite hard to do so. So people knew what kind of algorithms we could apply, but simply the hardware is not there to do that. You need supercomputers or stuff like that.
Okay.
They run all this on just battery-powered devices, mobile phones.
Okay, so I'm curious then, because we get kind of sidelined and are slightly biased towards game applications for virtual reality and artificial intelligence, because ironically enough, that's kind of where most of us currently reside in the games industry.
Games are awesome.
Yeah, games are awesome. But when it comes to virtual reality, there are many possible applications of it. And so when it comes to artificial intelligence, I'm curious whether or not, and I'm kind of saying this to you, Imre, because you've kind of got Surgeon Simulator, and I know it's not the same thing here, but one of the partners that we do a lot of things with is Amplified Robot, who own Medical Realities. And so there's this really interesting opportunity for somebody like Medical Realities to start using artificial intelligence, because they don't at the moment, with what they're doing to train surgeons and doctors in terms of the operating theatre environment and how they, execute not just the physical operation itself, but also the interaction between the different people who are within the operating theatre at any given time. And I can easily see how something like complex algorithms or artificial intelligence can be utilised to layer in data or to explain, possible scenarios. But there's also that distinct danger that when you have a database selection process that's being, created using artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms, that there is a lot of possibility and scope there for misdiagnosis or misinterpretation. And I'm curious what your perspective is on that kind of application of artificial intelligence in VR environments or AR environments.
So, yeah. That's a good question.
Well, you do Surgeon Simulator, so I thought maybe you had some views on this.
So the problem is, okay, so it is twofold. Firstly, I do believe that everything is better when you add AI on it, and the reality of the situation is that AI is a really fluffy term at this point in time, and so when someone says, "Oh, we applied AI," I am the first one to roll my eyes, because the vast majority of cases that's not even near it. But the reality is that processing, again, to me, it's about the amount of data you need to process. And you, even with brute force, you can't really do that. You need an intelligent machine with an agency to prepare that. And when it comes to a training scenario, for example, let it be surgery or not, a human observer, not only that you can't process the amount of data that you need, but also because of our human biases, it's much more likely that we are going to make mistakes in collecting that and interpreting the data and adding it into the application itself, right? So one point is that everything is better with AI, but then the other one is that, look, AI ultimately is our creation, and what was mentioned earlier about a procedurally generated game before, the problem is that there is a difference between mechanically pushing out a randomized and somewhat logical content, and there is a whole different ballgame to produce a content which has consistency, which has narrative arc, which has an educational intent, which in case of an educational program understands the progress of the students and all that. That's where the real AI kicks in. That's where the real, when all that infinite amount of data is what you have to produce the content to begin with, and then the crazy high amount of data you collect about your user and understand that real time and process that and adapt your content what you serve to them. And it doesn't matter if it's a video game or a surgery educational program or a somewhat interactive film. It doesn't matter what it is, but it's the same thing. It's just simply the scope and depth of the work is so much that AI will just be necessary to keep up with the requirements.
Okay, so two things here. First of all, I think it's interesting when you talk about the interactive behavior in terms of the user, and the fact that actually probably the best use of artificial intelligence isn't necessarily in what it's serving and delivering visually, or even in the creation of a character that you interact with, but more in terms of actually understanding behaviors and identifying and predicting behaviors for users, and actually even potentially plugging into econometrics, I think is way more interesting in terms of shaping the user experience than necessarily, making a plant appear in the distance, But I am also of the opinion that I'm really aware that sometimes we get a little bit too deep into these conversations without having fully explained ourselves. And because I know that you are kind of accurate in as much as there's a lot of people who use that phrase AI or artificial intelligence, and there isn't necessarily true clarification in terms of what they actually mean. And so, for example, many people would confuse procedural generated content with, to a certain degree, artificial intelligence. So I think it's worth explaining the differences between, for example, narrow AI and loose AI. And would you care to do that for us, Imre?
Oh, dear heavens. Look, I think that because the technology changes so fast and because the new ideas coming in all the time, I wouldn't want to get lost in the technological side of this. What I would suggest to people is that when you look at an AI, is the question to me, and this is not a binary question, this is a gradient of how far away it is from the output of this black box is from the amount of input it got. And the input is the values coming in, let it be a user request in a player pressing a button or in an educational environment, someone taking an action, and all the original data and all the original formulas. And then how far away, how much variety the output can be. Because what you'll find is that when AI is involved and advanced AI is involved, the answers which are coming out are going to be more granular and more varied than compared to the ones where it's basically just 1 + 1 = 2. When it's an AI, it can collect much more data, and the answer is going to be much more intricate. But what the big separation, but technologically, what people keep talking about is when a system is able to invent its own solutions. We've seen that the latest news was the Google Translate, which now managed to translate between languages it didn't know how to translate between because it created a pseudo language, and that was completely the AI doing on its own. So whilst before, what you saw is that you had a number of grammatical rules and meaning of words and all this in a dictionary, and that turned into a translation. It was very predictable. Whilst now, because the system got that extra freedom of AI, the answer is the outcome of the black box is much more granular because it can spend time understanding the contents and not just words, but entire sentences and paragraphs and translating it like that. So I know it's a very wishy-washy answer, but just basically what we'll see in the explosion is that the output of these AI-driven black boxes are going to be more granular, more personalized, and just basically understanding you better.
Okay, it's interesting because I know that we know a few people in common over at Spirit AI, and it's interesting that you're talking about this because it reminds me of a conversation that I had the other day where essentially I got to interrogate their poor little robot. I've done it a few times now, and I always feel really bad after I finished interrogating what is essentially a robot. But one of the interesting kind of things that they're working towards is this idea that the technology or the artificial intelligence is able to improvise. And that is a really key word there, improvise, which I think really does begin to create these experiences, whether that's in virtual reality or on a flat screen, that can't necessarily be predicted, and we don't quite know what's going to happen, but we know that it's going to react to us and the conversation that we're having and the way that we interact, whether we're being aggressive or not aggressive. And in fact, to some extent, and part of the conversation that I had with the guys was there's going to come a stage very, very soon where actually the mental health industry will have a really valid excuse and reason for interacting with the VR, the AI industries, because we are essentially creating personalities. We're layering in behaviors that create personalities. And so actually understanding psychology and the psychology and the way that people think is going to be a really valuable tool as people begin to become a little bit more knowledgeable about how they apply AI into these VR environments. I'm curious from your perspective, Nizar, whether or not you've kind of had any consideration or thought about the kind of benefits, if you like, of bringing in people from other industries, such as from the mental health and psychology industries.
This is actually a very good question because I'm married to a psychiatrist. I have one handy at home, and we do sometimes talk about things that are discussed in mental health. honestly, I don't think applying AI or intelligence will get us to that point really quickly. I think there's difference, I think personally, between intelligence and personalities. I mean, a lot of animals, for example, have a lot of intelligence, but we're going to go to the point where say they have strong personalities and go deep in that perspective. I don't think so. But maybe we'll get to that scenario where one day we discuss, the personality of these intelligent machines.
Poor Hal is depressed.
Yeah, the program is depressed. But I'm coming back to a point about artificial intelligence. I think it's opening new opportunities where we couldn't simply go or explore. And I'll go back to my previous answer about the hardware. That is the key to allow us to really explore this opportunity. I mean, I remember
what kind of hardware are you thinking of though when you say that?
I mean, look, when I was in university, I remember some of my friends were doing a lot of research in artificial intelligence, and my natural reaction back then, I thought they were doing science fiction that will never happen, never materialize, and they were probably wasting their time. And in the meantime, I chose to do classical programming and was quite fascinated with graphics and gaming. But now when this whole artificial intelligence, and particularly machine learning, deep learning, came back, I started saying that actually they were not that maybe crazy. This is happening. But what's caused that to happen? I think simply because back then when they were trying to prototype the algorithms and experiment, it was very, very hard to iterate quickly because simply they didn't have these capable computers and machines to run the algorithms or experiments. Now we can do that. Even a mobile phone can run very complex artificial intelligence algorithms. And the fact that we'll be able to iterate really quickly will help us all get to very interesting use cases.
Okay, so I'm interested to understand then from your perspective, given that you're talking about the fact that we do have this technology that can kind of keep up, if you like, with the creative and visual ideas that people have now for the technology. What do you think is that next big thing, other than the technology being able to keep up? Do you think there is a next step in terms of something that's going to come down that pipeline reasonably soon, within the next 5 or 10 years, that you think would actually completely shift gears in terms of the way that people are developing and able to bring these things to life? Because you talk about us, that your friends were kind of doing that stuff and you kind of thought, oh, that's very sci-fi. But I recall having a conversation with Oscar not that long ago where we were talking about sci-fi, we were talking about Westworld, we were talking about humans, and we were talking about actually, it's not that, completely insane to be thinking about those types of questions. And actually you can begin to actually see the roadmap and the dots along that map of how people could get to that conclusion. And it's not necessarily as unrealistic as people tend to think these things are. And sci-fi has become less sci-fi and more sci-fact over the last decade.
I forget who said this, but the classic problem is that we overestimate what can be done in the next 5 years, but we underestimate what can be done in the next 50 years.
Yeah.
And I think we're in that dilemma. The AI side of it in particular, they're very good at identifying specific behaviors or specific actions and providing some level of result for that. I don't want to say insight, because we're not at the stage where we understand consciousness, let alone the idea that we can imbibe consciousness in an artificial object. We actually need to be thinking about these things differently. And that's why in some ways I prefer like machine learning and deep learning as terms than AI sometimes. Yeah. It's how we apply that detailed analysis that these tools can do and in creative ways. And sometimes we apply them in methods that mimic human behavior. Other times we apply those tools so they can mimic something that humans can enjoy. But they're still performing against a series of rules, and they're finding deeper connections than maybe we'd be able to do because they can ask those series of simple logical questions more rapidly than we could.
Okay, and Imre, do you have a thought on this one?
This is really fascinating to listen to, but I think there is nothing new here. There have been a couple of research into this, that how many stories are there in human history, and I think that various researchers broke it down that there are only 4 stories or 6 or 12 stories to be told, and every single story you've ever heard is a variation of those 12, for example. And if you look at it, that's really, really neat and whatever. But basically, it was just big data used. And you discover a new truth about reality because you looked at all that data. And now imagine that what a machine can do, that even if it's not even nearing human intelligence, just the speed of it, simply because an electrical circuit is significantly faster than how the brain with the biochemical processes work, it's going to run circles around you. And so that's why I think it's what I said earlier, that everything is better with AI. And you're right, there is a lot of people underestimate what the future is going to bring, but also they misunderstand that where our role is. And we as creators and designers increasingly have to make a step back and think on a meta level, because yes, there will be a place for very traditional content creation, creativity, but also there will be an increasing need for people who don't create content. They build a machine which is going to create content. And that's the next layer. And the challenge of that is that it requires a very different knowledge of your own field. Let's say you're a game designer building levels for a third-person shooter game. Suddenly, it's not about you know how you can build a level, but it's about understanding why a level is good. But then the AI comes in, and not only can use that, but we'll be able to go further than that. And I think that Oscar alluded to this. There is a point where suddenly that AI system will start surprising you because of the huge amount of data it has, and because it doesn't come in with your prejudices. It can discover relations and it can discover new ideas which you could never think of simply because you're human. So I am extremely excited about this, and I think we're going to see some really cool stuff coming out. It's not going to happen overnight, but one step at a time.
I totally agree, but I want to just add that we shouldn't underestimate the power of humans' ability to pattern match, which we still haven't quite got to in most cases with AI, but we are getting very close to the point where very specific tasks, an AI or a computer system, a computer model at some form, can start to get close to what human beings can do in terms of pattern matching, and they do it without the bias, like Imre is saying. That lack of bias, that speed of finding connections is the thing that I'm personally, like Imre, very excited about, because what we can do as creative artists when we have those tools available, that idea of creating those sort of meta rules and then applying them and seeing the results of that can be incredibly interesting.
Just look at it this way. Sorry. That how this is already happening. We've all seen that neural network emulation where you look at a painting, then you look at a photo of something, and then the AI looks at it and creates that photo. It recreates in the style of that painting. It's absolutely mind-blowing. But the latest one, which is quite amazing.
Didn't somebody do this with Blade Runner, where they gave an artificial intelligence that they made it watch Blade Runner and then had it reconstruct Blade Runner using images from the internet? I
don't know that, but there are some interest. There is one example which looks at a picture, it predicts what happens next.
That's interesting.
And it says, I think what's going to happen is this. But my favorite one is a fairly new one, which was just announced very recently. I want to say either Bach or Mozart. I'm not sure which one. And it listened to the music and now can procedurally create a music of that style. And I'm not saying that Bach and Mozart is old news now because our robots are going to write better music. That's not the point. The point is the sheer scope and content. In any creative endeavors, I think we humans, our creative drive is still going to be there. But within that, the depth and that amount of stuff it can put in there is going to be huge. And I think this is one of the dangers with some games we are trying to use procedural and AI, is that they forget about that human soul. They think that the decoration, I can make a million artwork, I can make whatever. That's not good enough. There is a need for a creative intent. And AI is not quite there yet. It's soon, but not quite there yet. And those are the procedures which end up feeling heartless.
Okay, so here's the question I have for you then, which is, we're talking about this kind of, all these amazing opportunities for AI, and you're talking about what to some people might be really big ambitions for AI, but I think that there is this kind of fundamental stumbling block that still needs to be removed, and that is actually I'm going to say ego as a word here, but I'm sure that that's probably not the best term to use in this case. But the idea that as humans, we like to think that we're better at things. And we don't like the idea of necessarily having something else come along that we know makes us feel inferior or not as good at doing something. And when we look at attitudes in culture towards technology, that attitude back in the 1980s and the 90s was quite negative. Everything was very aggressive, in terms of, if you have robots, that robots are evil and they will kill us all. If you have artificial intelligence, it's Skynet and it will blow us all up. If there's any kind of technology that was being physically integrated with a human being and the human body, then it was negative in some way. And as we've moved forward, over the last kind of couple of decades, culturally, it's become slightly more acceptable. We now have an attitude towards technology where we don't mind carrying a mobile phone. We don't mind, the idea of maybe having, a wearable on our wrist, or, technology that helps us to fundamentally do something. But that technology isn't necessarily intelligent. And I think there is still that barrier certainly for culture and for the wider mainstream to necessarily accept artificial intelligence into their lives if they feel that it is somehow going to threaten them. And I'm curious what your thoughts are about that. And I'm going to start with you, Nizar.
I think for me, intelligence is not binary. It's not whether you're not intelligent or you're genius. I think it's a spectrum, like we observe in nature, different animals, even the humans, we don't all fit within the same definition of intelligence. I think we will see the same thing happening. I think the fear in the past was that people automatically assumed if you are going to have intelligence, it will be matching or even superior to the human intelligence, and even maybe the genius part of the human intelligence. And I think we're coming slowly to the realization, through what you said, acceptance of technology, that's not necessarily going to be the case. Technology is not going to make our life horrible. We are not going to have disasters and nuclear wars and exterminate planets. But the other way around, we got used to actually technology is making us better. We have never, I think, communicated between ourselves better than we do nowadays, thanks to smartphones and social networks. So I think the same thing will happen for intelligence. It will gradually appear in lots of use cases, and then we will come to realize that actually it's going to improve things and make things better, rather than the Skynet scenario, total extermination of the human race.
Okay.
But it's cyclical, isn't it? It isn't just like this isn't new. I mean, the reason why we have such a term as sabotage or Luddite was the introduction of technology having an impact in social consequence. And even the Luddites themselves were actually quite, forward thinking in various ways. It's just a case of how we present things. Think about the 50s, the white heat of technology, the excitement about Concorde and all these kind of things. We have all these cycles of like the fear and the excitement of new technology. And, we have nothing but, largely gained, but the technology itself is neutral. It's what we do with it. For every example of something marvelous, we have something terrible. There's a reason why there's a Nobel Peace Prize. Yes. Nobel made his dynamite, stable so that people would be able to, mine safely, and yet people used it to kill people. So it's not not a new issue. It's all, the same old thing. And it's a beautiful thing in some ways that anyone creative, will end up exploring possibilities. So I love science fiction so much is, think about Asimov talking about the 3 laws of robotics for a reason. And it's nothing to do with robots. It's to do with how people behave. It's just that if you put it in the context of robots, it allows us to have different questions asked rather than just a surface one. It's about motives in an abstract rather than motives in the emotional sense. And I think that's what a lot of these stories and myths are about. And of course, sometimes it's just a lot of fun to, take off and nuke them from orbit or whatever,
Let's not do that.
Yeah, but you know what I mean? There's so many different languages that we use in entertainment, which we don't mean, but it becomes then caught up and people get kind of very worried about things because change is inevitable.
Okay.
People don't like change, and that's all I think it's about.
I think you tend to be on the right side of that argument. Imre, what's your thoughts on this one?
I think what Oscar said is very important. It is inevitable. I'm pretty sure that there were a bunch of people arguing against automobiles and saying that horse-drawn carriages are so much better. And you know what? Some of them even remain business as a niche thing, but the vast majority of them went bankrupt. And this is the same with AI. You can argue, you can scream from the top of your lungs and against self-driving cars, but the reality is that it is just better, and therefore it is inevitably will win. I do see it slightly differently from the others about the outcome of this. There is I don't remember who said it. Someone very clever that Darwinism did not cause upset necessarily only because of religion, because even back then people could manage evolution and the Bible. It did not cause any trouble, which seems today that some people have trouble resolving that conflict. That wasn't the leading reason. The leading reason that suddenly we went from this kind of animals of the fables, the bunny is fast, the fox is cunning, the bear is kind, and all of a sudden you realize that nature doesn't give up, not one, and that was scary. And I think we can look at it, what Oscar said, that technology doesn't care. Technology is whoever's hands it is in. It is true. However, if and when, because it's when, we're going to reach super intelligent, suddenly that will have its own intent. And I think that is the scary part. Of course, there is in the midpoint, there are dangers that we program something which is extremely powerful, and just by accident it can destroy humanity. I'm not that worried about that, because at the same time, we're going to have robots and AI which create nanobots which make us live forever, right?
And then we have overpopulation and all sorts of other terrible things.
That's fine, because the AI is going to solve the problem. Like that, I think this is what it is that the people, we can't comprehend the intelligence of that AI and how intelligent it's going to be, that is going to solve all these problems. It's going to be nanobots. It's going to be Mars. It's all of these problems are going to be fixed, because the vast majority of these problems don't have a fundamental rule of the universe, physics or math, which prohibits from that being solved. It is just a problem which needs to be solved, and with brain energy is going to be solved, and these supercomputers will solve it. But the question
is also important to remember that Asimov was talking about intelligent robots in the 50s and 60s, and we still don't have them. So
we don't have flying cars, but we have Uber, and I can order from my phone, right?
Well, that's exactly where I was going. The bottom line for me is that we think we know where these things will end up. We don't always actually know.
I suspect that, and I am with Elon Musk and Bill Gates and Stephen Hawking with this one, because clearly I'm as clever as they are, right? I'm with them on this. That this is one of the scariest things. And I think the problem is that it is so tempting, and the riches and fulfilling every single sinful and rightful human desire we've ever had as a race. And it's just too promising. It's like the genie is there, and you just want to let it out because you know all the good things it can do. And yes, it might turn into an evil genie. The problem is that this genie might have a mind of its own. And at that point, it will look at us like ants. And as ants, you might not deal with them. You just step over them in the pavement. But God forbid they enter your kitchen, you are going to massacre their entire race with no remorse. And the same thing can happen with AI. So I think this is something that that we should look at very, very carefully. But there is one reason why I'm not worried. It's because I believe by the time we get super intelligent, I'm going to be dead. So it's not my problem.
Oh, Imre.
On that optimistic note.
On that lovely note, I will thank you all, gentlemen, for joining us this week. And as usual, we do like to ask you to share with us your social media handle of choice so that our lovely listeners can find out a little bit more about what you're up to, or, when you decide that you think the world is going to end. If you would care to share with us your social media handle of choice, and I will start with you, Oscar.
So I've got a crazy Twitter handle. It's Athanasius, which means immortal. So clearly I expect to be uploaded into a computer soon. My handle is spelt Athanateus. So that's Athanasius.
That's just because you're a visionary trendsetter. Imre, why don't you tell us what your social media handle of choice might be?
I think everyone should follow me on Twitter at Imre Jelle, because who knows, the super AI might be around the corner killing us all. And until then, why not follow me?
And Nizar, why don't you share with us your social media handle of choice as well?
Yeah, so Facebook or Twitter, it's both Virtual Arts Ltd for Limited. So there you
Wonderful.
go.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today, gentlemen. And thank you for listening. If you enjoy this content, don't forget to subscribe and review, and follow us on Twitter at Digital Jam Ltd. DigitalJamSessions.com